Thanks so much for staying with us on Decision 2022. I am now joined here live at the Nation Centre by what was referred to as my power panel to discuss issues ahead of the election, just a day to go. So on my extreme left, I'm joined by Professor Adams Olo, a political affairs analyst. Karibu sana, great to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
Right beside me is Bina Maseno. She is the executive director of Badili Africa. And on my immediate right, Manwa Magoma. Great to see you too, public affairs expert. Thanks for being with us. Just a day to the big day we've all been waiting for. Prof, I'll begin with you. At this point, you have covered elections before as a political analyst. How are you feeling?
Well, I think this is one of, again, a tight race. I think that since 2002, we've had two horse races, and this one is no different. And therefore, I think the race to the tip is on. And I think for the candidates now, since they gave their last call to the supporters yesterday, it's now about get out the vote and protect the vote.
Yeah, protect the vote. That is a key point. Bina, I'll bring you in now. As Adams alluded to, yesterday was the final day of the campaigns. We saw different rhetoric, but we also saw the key candidates calling for peace. What stood out for you from those campaigns?
So first of all the candidates went out and urged their supporters to come out and vote and be peaceful while at it, and trying to also rally the quote-unquote the undecided voters, in as much as the plans are not as concrete, but then just rallying the supporters, come out and vote on Tuesday.
Right. Yeah. What about you, Manwa? What perhaps was different from yesterday's rally? Because these gentlemen have been campaigning for what feels like several months now. We've seen them go head to head, political jibes to one another. What was so different for you yesterday?
I think for me yesterday it was the last chance to make an appeal to the supporters. One, to vote for them, and number two, to turn out. But what I found interesting, that stood out for me, was Right Honorable Raila Odinga's comments when he said that he's willing to extend his hand, whether he wins or he loses. I think for a long time we've not had those comments directly coming from him in the manner that they did yesterday. And I think that for me stood out quite a lot. And the DP speaking later on after I had spoken, I think the DP also said yes, he's willing to also shake hands, but just that he will make sure there's no handshake that allows Raila into the presidency. So you see, after all the dueling and all the noise making and everything that has happened over the 3 months, everybody is now coming to the table and say, look, the fight is done. It's now the voters to decide. But also let me point out something. These elections, this campaign period has arguably been the most peaceful that Kenya has witnessed in many years. I think even if I were to track lives lost, I think there were some 2 gentlemen who died in Karatina or something of the sort, but that's the only one that I can remember. It's not your usual, every year, crowds fighting with each other, stone throwing, regardless of what elective position people are contesting in. And I think also a lot of the women candidates also were able to campaign a bit more. They were allowed a bit more space than we saw in the previous elections.
What are your views on that? You are also the vice chair of the IEBC Women Coordinating Committee. What are your thoughts on the role of women in this particular election?
I think just to add on to what he has said is, so while the numbers have been low in terms of the deaths we've had, I think we've actually had 5, right?
Total of 5.
Yes, a total of 5. While the numbers have been low, online harassment when it comes to the female candidates has not significantly declined, right? I think FIDA and Kenya National Human Rights Commission have actually documented that. So that in that particular aspect, it's not declined. It's still a concern when it comes to the verbal abuse, especially on the online platforms, and also this extends also in their campaigns at the same time. But at the WCC level, we are still urging women to come out and vote. And we're also still urging young people to come out and vote. And I think what is also slightly sad is the fact that in this election, we had a bit of a dip in terms of the number of young people who registered as first-time voters. In the last election, it was 52%, and in this election, it's 39%. So it means, especially the youth vote won't significantly sway the election. So it's our hope that the ones who registered to vote are actually going to come out and vote, and that's the message we're trying to drum currently.
Let me just come in on there's this misconception that people have been having that the voter is predominantly young. And I don't know where people are getting that conception from. Yes, Kenya is generally a young population, but the voters are not necessarily young. I mean, the registered voters of 18 to 35 only makes up about, is it 41% or thereabout of the total registered voters. So that's a small number. Everybody has been saying, almost more than 50% of the voter is youth, but it is not. If you look at the ratio between the population spread, so the country 18 to 25, is it 18 to 25? I think is about 13%, and yet on the register of voter they only control only 10%. That's 18 to 24. So that in itself reflects quite a lot that the young people who we were expecting that were coming out to register to vote, they didn't come out to register to vote, to register as voters. That the ones who've been seeing all these places and attending these rallies, but come Tuesday, the people will be voting, people 35 and above.
All right.
Yes.
Do you think, yeah, go ahead.
I think that is why I think I was also saying I'm a bit anxious, especially with a few who registered to vote, because the number has dipped, right? But if you look at the bulk of the population, I think it's made hugely of Gen Z and millennials, right? Above 35, like you said. But then if even the few ones who registered to vote do not turn up and vote, so at the end of the day, I don't think we'll have a major say in this election.
Prof, what's your view on voter turnout come Tuesday?
Yeah, again, I think I'll agree with my fellow panelists that there is what you call conventional wisdom, that it's the youth that are going to determine this election. The statistics say something totally different. And I think that, as she says, the ones who one will find hard to take to the queue are the 18 to 35.
Right.
And I think that both campaigns must have a very direct and specific mobilization tool on get out the vote, because otherwise they'll just continue with their business. They have this kind of attitude that it won't make a difference in my life. And I think it behoves on both sides of the campaign to get them there, because otherwise, even the 13% Magona is talking about, you might find that only 6% turn out to vote.
Yeah. So concerns there. I just want to pick up from what Manu said earlier about the campaigns and the attitude and what was said between the two key candidates, Raila Odinga and William Ruto, about reaching out to each other after the election results are announced. Professor, do you really believe them? Do you really think that either or would accept defeat?
Well, I think that both candidates have said that they will accept the results. But if I recollect well, both of them also said that in the event that each of them feels that they didn't lose the elections fairly, then there is the Supreme Court, and therefore they would file a petition. And I believe that should be the way to go, because that's what the Constitution provides for, so that the Supreme Court ends up being the arbiter. The trend is that ever since we got the 2010 Constitution, the loser goes to court, and therefore I expect that even in this race, the loser will be going to the Supreme Court. So I can attest to you that both sides, the lawyers, are working as hard as the mobilizers.
Right. Yeah. Do you anticipate us getting into that long stretch, Manwa? So many people I've spoken to are like, we just want this election to come and be over and done with, and not extend it to a longer period.
There are things that we must accept that the Constitution allows us. And I think during the campaign period, I used to hear the UDA candidate, Dr. Ruto, say that the Azimio candidate is one who never accepts defeat. But I think the important thing is that going to court is part of that process. It's part of our electoral process. And we may not like it, but that's what we gave ourselves, and that's what we demanded as Kenyans, that we want in the Constitution, that if somebody loses, then it becomes a Supreme Court battle. My prayer then is that with the speed with which the Supreme Court normally resolves those cases, because the cases will not just be for the presidency, they will go run all the way down to the MCA level. With the speed with which Supreme Court resolves those cases, then I wish that the other cases for the other positions are resolved as fast as that, because I think there was so for example the case of the Jubilee MP for Gatondo. I think that case dragged on until almost this year.
Yeah, I think that the Supreme Court for the presidential is 14 days.
Right.
For the other races is within 6 months.
Right, which is a long time.
Yeah, but the suspense is usually more for the presidential.
Of course.
The others, I think, there are those who are in office, and there's no suspense at all.
Right.
But the presidential one, I think the country will come to a standstill as it waits on the Supreme Court decision. Yeah.
Of course, the vote for the presidency is a critical one. But Bina, from where you sit, how important and crucial are the local votes as well?
They are, and I think, currently, even as we rally young people and even women at the community level, the conversation is more on the presidency. And even for the ones who would be anxious not to come out and vote, they allude to the fact that, it's already been decided. But then the other positions haven't been decided, because even when you ask them, okay, so was your member of parliament already decided in the other election? Do you even know who your member of parliament is? Do you even know who your MCA is? Then there's that disconnect in terms of you don't even know who your MCA is, who your MP is, but then you're like, no, it's already been decided. So it's more of also ensuring that we tell people this election is actually not just about the presidency, that your MCA matters, your MP matters, your women rep matters, your, your senator matters, to ensure that when you go to the polls, you're actually going to vote for all those other 6 positions. And I think, sadly, majority of us, by the time we're going to the polls, you actually are very, very sure half the time of the president and the governor you're going to vote for. But then for the other position, you're either looking for, do I just go with my party, or who even looks good, or who do I like in this, or who have I heard about? So the other positions are equally as important, and that should be reason enough for you to come out and vote, even if you feel like maybe at the presidential level you're not very sure, or there's no choice that impresses you. There are various other positions that you actually need to elect on Tuesday.
Right.
There's a slight difference on that. That if you come to the city and the towns, then you'll find that most of the time, as she says, most of us might not know the MCA. But if you go to the rural area, I think that the MCA position is the most volatile, and people really know who is this MCA.
Yeah, the rural areas,
exactly.
compared
So
to the
it
urban.
depends on the urban, rural
Right.
Yeah, but no, just even outside of the voter, but even when you look at it from a political party's perspective, I think this election may end up creating situations in the National Assembly that one candidate may win the presidency and then the other one has control of the National Assembly, just from a single party perspective. From a coalition perspective, it's based on the statistics that are being presented, it looks like 50-50. But if you then look at it purely from a party numbers perspective, then you're in a situation where then one party, assuming that Azimio wins the presidency, and we know the Azimio candidate belongs to ODM party. So ODM in itself as a party may not have as many numbers in parliament as ODM. And that therefore then brings a question whether also will the coalition hold, because in the event it shakes a little bit and then people go separate ways, then you end up with more delicate situations. Now with that in mind, all these other positions then become very significant, particularly so for this election.
Right.
I think there the coalition has to hold, because normally what happens is that if a particular coalition wins, once you are the president and you have the pie and the knife,
you can slice it.
They'll always draw to you. The problem comes for the one that loses. Normally the one that loses, those other coalescing parties normally start to shift to the governing party. And I think we saw that in 2002, after NAC came to power. Once they had a difference, there was a divide between NAK and LDP. And then we also saw when PNU won with only 43 seats, and ODM had the majority, you found all the smaller parties grouping around the president's side, because that's where the pie was.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think just to add on to what you're saying on the party as well, because if you look at how the party consensus and zoning was done, it might not necessarily actually favor the candidates who were actually given the tickets, because in some regions citizens feel like we should have just gone ahead with the nomination, because this particular candidate might have been just forced down our throat because either the party prefers them, and that might not favor the party. So if it doesn't favor the party, it means it reduces your numbers actually in parliament. So it's going to be also an interesting election to watch.
Most definitely. I really just need to ask this question because according to the polls, and it seems relatively obvious that, it is a two-horse race between Raila and Ruto. But interestingly, Professor Wajakoya and David Maurice, they think that they are going to win this election. What are your thoughts on that, Manwa?
I mean, they'll be mad to think they will not win. I mean, because you get into a race hoping to win. I'm assuming that's why everybody gets into a race. But if they get more than 2% each, they will have done very well for themselves. They will have done so well for themselves. And I think at some point in time, the Wajakoya message was starting to reach quite a number of people, particularly when he started, when he was talking about marijuana and legalizing it or making it, bring it into the country, or for medicinal purposes. And at that point, I think that resonated with a lot of people, even though when you look at it, it was not a viable policy plan, but just the thought of it was just exciting. And when he now began speaking about all those other things, then everybody stopped taking him seriously. Right. And therefore his ratings began going down. I think the last polls that I've seen is like about 2% or something of the sort. So they will get a maximum between the two of them, 4%. That's maximum that I think between the two of them, 4 to 5%. But that then brings in the interesting question then, if they could be able to get 4 to 5%, could there be an extreme possibility of a runoff? That then you've got these two people who've come in and have taken away 5% of the vote. Yeah. So therefore, if the race then becomes, then the other two horses have got only 95% between the two of them.
Right, right.
If they split that almost close to the middle, then it becomes a totally different scenario.
Yeah, Professor, do you have any views on that?
Yeah, I think we should be fair to Wajakoya. Magoma shouldn't put Wajakoya and Maure in the same. I think Maure is in decimal points,
right.
And it's Wajakoya that has been oscillating between 2 and 5.
Yeah.
I think Magoma is right. He came in with a bang, then
quite literally,
then fizzled out and has really been fizzling out. I don't see him crossing the 2.5% mark, and since it's 2.5%, me, I see around 1 win. From where I sit, I think there'll be no runoff.
Oh, okay, interesting. Do you have any thoughts on that, Bina?
Personally, in fact, I was actually just mentioning to Prof that, you know, Wajackoyah came with a bang, and perhaps come with that bang before we finish the voter registration. Maybe a bit more young people would have actually registered to vote,
right.
you know. The same thing even with maybe Azimio's deputy president, you know, in terms of even encouraging maybe more women and young women to vote. So both, if they'd come before we actually finish registering to vote, they've encouraged more young people to register to vote, and then maybe just ride on that, because for Wajackoyah's narrative is more popular amongst young people, and not actually all young people, because also we can't assume young people are homogeneous and all of them agree to the narrative. I mean, to his narrative, but yes, it's true. His popularity has declined, and I am not pretty sure he's going to go beyond 2.5. But you know, like they say, the voter has a say. You know, the voter has a say.
Yeah.
So we'll wait for Tuesday.
You know, just to clarify, I'm not saying that there's going to be a runoff. I know, from where I sit and all the numbers that I've seen, statistically, I know one of the candidates will win. It's just that these two gentlemen might, I mean, because voters, we don't know how voters are. In the most extreme situation, we might find that it's split almost 50-50, and then these two people then would have been the ones who forced us into a runoff.
Okay.
But there will be a definite winner in the first round.
All right. I'm sure a lot of people are looking forward to that, if indeed it is the case. Now, this election is, of course, fascinating for so many reasons. One of them is the role that women are playing in this election. Case in point, Martha Karua as the deputy for Raila Odinga, and we also have Justina as deputy for Wajackoyah. As you know, Badili Africa, the executive director, that sort of deals with civil society. From where you sit, Bina, what are your views about how women have risen in politics?
So first of all, there's really been a struggle in terms of pushing for the two-thirds gender rule, and I think even from the last parliament, before even the Chief Justice retired, he'd even issued an advisory to dissolve parliament because it was not constitutionally, it was constitutional as it was. And for me, and from where we stand, to even see the presidential candidates select women, I think it's a win. You know, it's a win. And even just across the other position, we've seen in this election many more young women, and many more women have also come out to run for political office, even in terms of being deputy governors, being for the senatorial position, and even majority of them for the MCA position. Maybe slightly disadvantaged because for some of them they did not actually get the political party tickets, and some of them are also edged out when the parties were considering zoning and consensus. But it's a win. It's a step towards the right direction, and it inspires many more young women to step up, you know, and occupy the leadership position. And I hope we can continue. You know, we can continue with that, such that in the next election we actually have a woman step out to actually run for the presidency and win.
That would be incredible. All right, now, of course, all eyes on the IEBC as we head to August 9th. On this day, I mean, how prepared do you reckon we are, Professor? And also, what impact is that manual register that's now been included in the mix going to have on this race, in your view?
If I was to assess the electoral bodies post-2007, then in my assessment, I would say this one looks like the most prepared one. That is not to say that they are not ready to conduct the elections. It's basically just to compare and say that, for example, we have seen this particular IEBC being compelled by stakeholders when they had Book 1 of Book 2, and they were compelled to withdraw it. That has never happened with any other independent electoral body. For the first time also, we are seeing an IEBC that did an audit and literally sat on it until last week. And even when they finally released it, we are being told that they only released 49 pages of 160 documents,
Yeah.
basically bringing the question, what is it that they don't want the stakeholders and the public to know? It's the same IEBC that we saw the Venezuelan issue, then out of the blues, the chair goes to a press conference with the IG and say that we have now settled it without us getting to know
what
exactly transpired. It is the same IEBC that we are told that added 6,000 polling stations, and the statistician should tell us whether the extra 2.3 million voters justifies 6,000 polling stations, given that each polling station has 700. The math doesn't add up.
Yeah.
So I think there are a lot of gray areas. Then I have to also say this, that this IEBC has not been inspiring insofar as public communication is concerned. That whatever you could take away from Ezra Chilova, which one side of the political divide really had issues with him, but you couldn't take away his ability to communicate to the public and answer queries, even if you didn't agree with the answers that he gave. So, but let us wish them the best, because they are what we have. They are a constitutional independent body, and one just hopes that they'll cross the line.
Yeah,
this is going to be the most opaque elections that we've had, because think about it. We've gone back to, is it 2002, about the transmission of results, where we have to wait for these 46,000 forms to come physically, and then people have to tabulate, meaning therefore then citizens watching TV or following election results, there will be no provisional results as it used to be, technically. Right. Number two, from what I'm hearing them saying, that they will not transmit results for all the other positions. They will only transmit for the presidency. So the other positions will only be done and concluded at those places. The danger of that is that it creates so many centers of people starting to say, I got these votes and I got the other votes. And the moment you have the public starting to speak before you do, and therefore you are playing catch up, everybody wants to believe the candidate won. And so if by 11th, if they're not giving people anything, people start saying, okay, in this particular area, our numbers show this, and then our numbers show the other. Then you start creating a certain anticipation and expectation from people. So from that perspective, it's very, very opaque. And just as he had said, even, for example, the issue of Form 34B, that earlier on they had said that they were not going to print, for example. I just found that to be a bit too cheeky. And maybe something that we just need to get a clear understanding on. And I will also say, even though it was the most opaque, this is the most opaque elections, they've also been let off quite easily. If you think about the issue of the audit, just as a case example, where the voter verification or the voter register was supposed to have been published by a specific day, which didn't happen. Then they said no, because we're doing the audit, so there's something that we need to do. All those things are within the Elections Act. And they've constantly broken the law in that regard, that if a lawyer went to court on the purity of law, then these elections will be cancelled, just on the purity of law. I'm
interested to know why that didn't happen then, why a lawyer didn't go to court.
I mean, the lawyers here, but I guess maybe people didn't see, probably both parties, because the people who compel lawyers to go to court are the parties, or the candidates. They're the ones who more often than not compel the lawyers to go to court.
All right, we've got to close, I'm afraid, but before we do, I just wanted to bring up the final point about security, because when we think of elections, that's another issue that comes to the fore. Bina, when we spoke earlier, you talked about your concern when it comes to security for women in this election.
Yes, so I was even just going through the stats, and even then I think the National Police has said they've trained, I think, about 1,100 commanders, and they're going to deploy about 150,000 police officers across the country. And I think also IBC is trying to also hammer in the message that the elections are going to be secure. I think that affirmation is very, very important, because in 2017, I think we also saw the report by the Kenya National Human Rights Commission on violations against women and children, and the police were even implicated on that. and even just being intimidated when you're going to the polling station, and even just speaking as a candidate who's been affected, as a former political aspirant who's also faced assault on a campaign trail, and the matter not being taken seriously when you go to the police, because sometimes violence, you know, they look at violence as the cost of participating in political processes, and that continues deterring even many women from running for political office and even showing up as voters. So I'm also very keen to see how that will be taken up, especially on Tuesday, with all the plans that have been put in place, as much as some of these efforts came way too late. You know, even the meeting by the DPP, I think it was just a week ago, trying to assure Kenyans of the plans that have been put in place. So all these things are coming way too late, yet we had some of these cases during the nominations, you see. So even just collecting data and you know, spreading the information on where you can even report, what you need to do, what are the recourse mechanism, all this information is coming way too late. And it's my hope that what we've seen before, the data that we've collected before, is going to inform our strategies to ensure that it's actually a secure election.
Right, okay. And of course the rallying piece, the rallying point and message at this point is a call for peace as we approach August 9th on the day and beyond. There is still so much more to discuss, but I'm afraid we are out of time. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight, Professor Adams Olo, Bina Maseno, and also Manwa Magoma. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
You've been watching Decision 2022. Keep it right here. We have so much more lined up for you throughout the next few days and weeks too. But for now, Mark Masai is ready to bring you some